Good evening, and thank you for tuning in tonight. I am New York City Councilman Chaim, and you're listening to Chaim on the Radio. I'm live here in the studio tonight, joined by my social distance co-host, Dr. Faye Zakheim, and we are filling in tonight for Zeb Brenner on Talkline Communications Network. Good evening, Faye.
Hi, Chaim. How are you? It's so good to hear your voice, always.
Nice and cold and nice and windy outside, and tomorrow will even get colder. You're upstate, and I can imagine
I'm upstate, and
what it feels like.
Absolutely. It's gorgeous. It's a winter wonderland. We had a huge snowstorm, and it is just absolutely gorgeous outside. One of these days, you'll do the radio show up here live, so everybody can see how gorgeous it is.
It is gorgeous. I spent my high school years upstate New York, like I told you this. I told you this morning on the phone. So it's nice and quiet there, but those days are gone. I like when it's noisy. I like to hear the noise. I like to hear the garbage trucks outside at 2 o'clock in the morning. I like to hear sometimes even the horn honking. It's too quiet to be upstate, so I like it here.
That's what we're going to talk about tonight, Councilman. How much you love all of the action.
I really have no choice, because when I have constituents calling me up complaining about the horn honking, I know what it feels like because I like listening to it, and I know what they could go through by liking, for them to like peace and quiet, like you're enjoying upstate New York. But I just want to say, yesterday was January 27th, was International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and today I spoke at a meeting of the full City Council to honor the memories of the victims and the survivors of Nazi brutality. And I'm going to play the audio recording of my speech now, and once we're done with the recording, then when we come back, we'll welcome a Holocaust survivor, Zahava Ungar, and she will share her story in remembrance of Holocaust Remembrance Day, which was yesterday. Every year on January 27th, which was yesterday, we commemorate International Holocaust Remembrance Day. It is a day to reflect upon the lives lost during the Holocaust and to honor the memories of the victims. I often talk about the fact that my parents were survivors of unspeakable horror during the Holocaust, and how that shaped my worldview. Today I want to take a moment to talk about the incredible stories of bravery, heroism, and faith displayed by victims of Nazi brutality. One story is about two sisters who were imprisoned in Auschwitz during the war, just 14 and 16 years old. They had a friend in the same barracks as them who fell ill. Without medical attention, being sick in the concentration camp was a slow and painful death sentence. But these girls tried everything to save their friend's life. She was desperate for water, but there was none available. So each night, these girls would burrow through the floorboards and climb into the freezing cold mud under the barracks. There under the barracks, there were pipes covered in condensation. Each night, they would spend hours sucking the condensation off the pipes, spitting it into a bowl, and then feeding their friend that liquid. That saved her life. Another story tells the tale of a young man who was in a concentration camp in Poland. He was ordered by his Nazi guard to go into a shed where dead bodies were stored until they could be cremated. The Nazi told this young man to bring him a pair of pants off one of the dead bodies. Inside the shed, the man felt around and found pants for the Nazi. Before he brought them outside, he noticed there were pages in the pocket. He pulled them out and found an entire section of the Talmud, a holy Jewish book. He smuggled those pages back to his barracks, and every night he and a friend would sit outside under the moonlight, studying the Talmud. In the midst of hell, they kept their Jewish souls alive through the suffering. They both survived the war and lost contact. 50 years later, the once young man was marrying off his granddaughter. At the wedding, he met his old friend from the concentration camp, who happened to be the grandfather of the groom. Finally, I want to share the story of another young man in Auschwitz. He was only 15 years old, and he was assigned to work in the kitchen. Every day, under the watchful eyes of the Nazi guards, he and the other prisoners would prepare food for the fellow inmates. And each day they would watch as the food went into the trash, even as prisoners were starving to death. Finally, this young man couldn't take it anymore. Risking his life, he would smuggle potato skins out of the garbage and under his shirt. In the barracks, he would distribute those meager portions to the sick, the elderly, and the children. That 15-year-old boy survived the war, and he moved to America, where he raised his 4 sons with his wife, who was another survivor. He was my father, and he was my hero. The victims of the Holocaust endured tragedies we can hardly bear to imagine, but we can honor their memories by remembering their bravery and by continuing to support the Holocaust survivors who remain here in New York City. God bless America, God bless our Holocaust survivors, and God bless you all. And we are pleased to welcome Mrs. Zahava Ungar, an Auschwitz survivor who I've been privileged to speak with many times in the past. Mrs. Ungar, thank you for joining us tonight.
You're very welcome. As I said, my name is Zahava Ungar. My story, I'm going to tell you only my own story, because in general, Holocaust story is a different one for every other person who survived. My story started already in 1939. We lived in the Czech Republic, not far from Prague. And in 1939, when the Germans marched in, it was September, and as soon as they marched in, they took away my father's livelihood, because they took away the whole business where he used to work. And we were commanded to come up to the Gestapo in Prague. I don't know if anybody can imagine the fright we felt to appear in the Gestapo. This was like a nightmare. My father was saying Tehillim a whole night and crying, which I never saw him before and not after, crying. And we came to the Gestapo. They still were pretty decent then, and they gave us 2 weeks to leave the country, or they were going to take care of us. So we had to leave within 2 weeks' time, which was a great pity, because we were 4 siblings, and we were all registered to be traveling on the kinder transport, on the group of children were taken to England. But we needed 4 weeks, and we had only 2, so we missed out. And we moved, then we were yet allowed to go wherever we wanted, and we moved to Czechoslovakia, to the Carpathian mountain area, which was under the Hungarian rule. There we lived pretty decent life, but my father had no more income. He couldn't find work because licenses were taken away from all the Jews already who were there. And we were refugees. Of course, we couldn't get any license for anything. So our situation started being from worst to worst. But somehow we still survived. Then they started taking away my father, and my mother stayed alone with her 4 children. And I'm not going to tell you that we completely starved, but we were living on bare minimum. To buy another loaf of bread was a discussion. Yes or no? Maybe we can survive another night without it. So you can imagine that the life wasn't easy anymore, but still more or less okay. Then they took away my father again. He came home for a while, and they took him again. Since 1942, I have not seen my father anymore.
Wow.
My sister and brothers left school, and they went to work. We should be able to eat. And came, but somehow we were still there till 1944. Just when the Germans came in already to that area. We were commanded to put on the yellow stars, and my sister was sewing the stars, She was doing anything possible together with my brother to bring in a little income for the family. And we were there till 44, just after Pesach. In the morning, there was a knock on our window, out. You can just imagine what it means all of a sudden. You have to leave your home, all your belongings, everything. You just have to go. Beforehand, they told everybody, we heard already rumors, to buy knapsacks. Of course, we did not have money to buy knapsacks, so my mother sewed for us each, from linen, from sheets, knapsacks. And we should be able to carry in the knapsack some food for us. Now, we arrived, when they told us to leave the house, they marched us to not too far from our house, to a lumber yard. That was the ghetto. We were there for about a month. No food was given. Somehow between two stones, my mother put a little pot and cooked for us something like some legumes which she took along and so forth. Somehow we survived that month there. And then we were told we have to leave. We have to leave. They, of course, didn't tell us where, so we were all putting on our knapsack and we were marching towards the train station. Not the Germans were leading us, the Hungarian gendarmes. They were responsible for us. On the way, a little kid lost his mother. He started crying. So my mother felt sorry for him and held his hand. The gendarme was very angry. How dare she do something like that? He took his rifle. With the butt, he hit her over the head. With the bayonet, he cut open the knapsack. Everything fell out that we had. We had one loaf of bread, which we took along. That came in from a non-Jewish neighbor who sent it into the ghetto. So we had that one loaf of bread. Of course, it fell out. We had nothing. We went up on the cattle train. Everybody must know by now how the Jews were transferred to the concentration camps. And we had nothing. By the time we were all sitting on the train, my youngest we had a fifth child born in 1942, beginning of 1942.
Where was the child born? In which town?
That was where we were living. It was in the Carpathia Mountain, Ungar. Uh-huh. It was called Ungar. And the child was begging for a piece of bread. He had no bread. Finally, somebody felt sorry for him, gave him a slice of bread. He turned it in, back and forth. Nothing, no spread, nothing, empty. Well, that's my last memory of my little brother, who was 1 month shy of 2 years. When we arrived, we didn't know which way we were going, but we saw from a little window that was able to see something, that we're nearing towards Poland. When we came towards Poland, some people were looking out of that window and said, oh, some people are working. Maybe we'll survive. Maybe we'll be able to work. We'll survive. My mother said to me, I don't believe so. We are no better than the Polish Jews. I don't think so. Anyhow, we arrived already finally to Auschwitz. And that scare when you arrive. They welcome us with that screaming out, rouse. This is something that I think everybody who lived through it will remember it forever. With the dogs, with the bayonet or something like kind of, they were hitting us over the head. And they told us, leave your belongings behind. You were not needed. You'll find it next to your beds. When you get to the place where you are, you're going to find it next to your bed. Of course, we wanted to believe it. Besides, we had no choice. We came off empty-handed, and There were there some people who were there from before. Those are the people who wore the striped uniforms. They told everybody, please give your little children to the elderly. Don't keep them by yourself. Give them over to the elderly. And which mother wants to give up her child? They knew what they were talking about. They wanted to some young people's lives to be saved. Anyhow, we came down and we were marching towards us standing 5 to a row and marched toward it. At the end was sitting Mengele, the famous Mengele was sitting there. But before we were able to reach him, my mother told me quietly, don't tell anybody that you are only 13. From now on, you always say you are 16, and don't you forget it. So, of course, I listened to my mother. We arrived closer to Mengele, and he says, ask me what age I am. And I told him I'm 16. He showed me to one place, and my mother and my brothers to the other place. My son, I had one sister who was older than me, which I mentioned before, that she went to work already for food. She was with me. We were together, the two of us. And we were sent out like, I don't know if everybody I presume saw the pictures, were shaven bald. And we were sent to barracks, to be there. Most of the time, we were just laying around in the barracks. Sometimes we had to work. I don't know if you can imagine that, but at the age of 13, I was sent to break up big stones with a hedge. I forgot the name.
A sledgehammer.
A big hammer.
A sledgehammer, yeah.
Yeah. But somehow I succeeded doing it. Today, when I see big, husky men doing such a job, I can't imagine how I did it, but I did it. Rest of the days our days consisted mostly of tzelapel, which was the counting, which twice a day, early in the morning and late in the late afternoon. It was May by the time we arrived to Auschwitz. It wasn't so cold anymore. But when you have to get up around 4 or 5 o'clock, none of us had a watch. I have no idea what time it was, but it was still dark. And stand in one place for hours at a time for that counting, it's very difficult. We were very cold because all we got one piece of clothing, no underwear, no anything. Just one piece of clothing. So we were frozen. Rest of the day was consistent, most of the time, almost every day, of selections. They constantly selected between us who goes to work, who stays. Somehow we were staying together, my sister and I. My sister always said, wherever they take you, they'll take you. I'll get to you. Don't worry about it. As long as we are together, we don't mind if you're going to be killed. As long as we are together. That promise we couldn't keep either, because after a short while, one of the selections, my sister was taken, and I stayed behind. And I was there for 6 months in Auschwitz, till about October. And the last selection out of Auschwitz, we were standing in line for that selection, and there always had some soldiers there and different German personnel. And one lady who was wearing a white coat took me behind her back and pushed me to the other side. That's how I survived.
Wow.
That's actually, I would say this is my second miracle. The idea that my mother told me not to say I'm 13, and that was number one. And number two, that lady pushed me behind her back.
Well, Mrs. Ungar, a year ago you visited the site of Auschwitz for the first time.
Yes, I did.
Since you were a child. So
yes, I wasn't there since, and I never thought I will be, but I did go.
And what was the experience when you walked in there?
I tell you, the whole thing was. It's not the same Auschwitz. Without the dogs, without the screaming, without the... How can you compare it? It was nothing like that. We were taken by a beautiful plane, and we were staying in a nice hotel, and so it's no comparison. But this shook me up very much when we came near the crematorium in the gas chamber. Because that I only heard about. I never saw it. We saw the chimney, smoking every single day and night. That smoke constantly came out. That shook me completely to my core. Till now, from last year on, I constantly thinking of these steps going down to that gas chamber and about this half-broken crematoriums. Yeah.
Mrs. Ungar, it's yesterday, like I mentioned before, we celebrate. I mean, we had remembrance for International Holocaust Day,
right.
Which is January 27th.
Right, yesterday, right? And today was a year ago we came back.
You came back, and it's so important that now more than ever, while we have the Holocaust survivors here, such as you, you have played a tremendous role in educating our future generations, and we were fortunate to have you testify at the city council hearing, and you really put tears into people's eyes, and it's so important more than ever. So tell our listeners, why is it important? Why do you feel, as a survivor as yourself, to share your story, especially with the young people? Why is it so important?
Why is it so important? Because I'm frightened it shouldn't happen again.
Exactly.
I'm frightened from the first moment I stepped on this land, with all the democracy, with all the good things we have here, which is a blessed country, no question about it. But I'm still afraid, because things could turn around in a second. Especially today, when the atmosphere is already ripe for it. Then we can hear already that in Borough Park some people pass the street being beaten up, or in Crown Heights.
Yeah, anti-Semitism is alive and well, even here in New York
City.
That's
exactly what I'm trying to say. When it happened over there, we didn't believe it's going to happen either. We also thought it's going to pass.
And even when it happened, no one believed it until, like you mentioned before, until you actually saw it.
It's actually lived it. Not only
saw it and lived it.
And I told you the story about my mother being beaten by the Hungarian gendarme, just to point out that if not the cooperation of the civil population, it could have never been happening. They would have never been able to round up all the Jews like that in no time. I believe the whole Hungarian population was taken away within a month.
Wow. So we must never forget, and we always must say...
Never.
And we always must say never again.
But you know what? Many people don't want to hear it anymore.
Well, that's why we need to constantly educate the younger generations, and it's so important. So Mrs. Ungar, I'm going to ask you... before we finish, if you could give a bracha, a blessing, to all our listeners.
Well, I don't know if I am up to that stage to give brachas, but I would wish on everybody should have a long, healthy life. Should never happen to our nation, whatever happened to us then. That's all I can say. Yes, I am hoping for my family and for Klal Yisrael.
Amen. Thank you so much, Mrs. Ungar. Thank
welcome.
you so much for joining us and sharing your story.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
take a commercial break, and we'll be right back.
Talkline Network Radio, America's longest-running Jewish broadcast network, the voice of the Jewish community.
And now your host.
Welcome back, and you're listening to Chaim on the radio, 620 on your AM dial. It's very difficult to transition into another conversation after listening to Mrs. Zahava Ungar, an unbelievable lady, and she really is always up front and center when it comes to educating our younger generations about the Holocaust atrocities that the Jewish community, the Jewish people went through. So now we are pleased to welcome a good friend, Nick Zorin, a co-founder of the Coalition for Safe Housing, which is a new committee organized by local residents in the 48th Council District. And Nick has joined us tonight to speak about their mission and how you can get involved with their organization. So welcome, Nick.
Councilman Deutsch, thank you. Thank you for having me on your show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great having you. And, for our listeners, we have been speaking the last several weeks about a shelter that's opening in my district on Neptune Avenue. And the mayor has this plan back from 2017 to open 90 new shelters across the city of New York. And I'm totally opposed to congregate shelters, such shelters that the mayor is planning on opening throughout the city. But you know something? He did such a horrible job in turning back our city. So whatever happens in the rest of the city, I don't want to happen in my district. So that's why we are pushing for permanent housing. We're pushing for supportive housing. And we don't want the mayor's homeless shelter, because if you walk out on the street, speak to people who are street homeless, and you ask them to go into one of these shelters, they don't want to go in. They tell you it's unsafe. They don't like it. They have between 14 and 17 people per room. There's no privacy. There's no way of getting people to be independent. There's no real services. So this organization that just opened up, they are really pushing for supportive housing, which is long-term housing. So Nick is the co-founder of the Coalition for Safe Housing, and that's a new committee. And so we're going to ask Nick to give us a little background of what your purpose is and what your goal is.
Yes, thank you so much. And you're absolutely right. Sort of a shelter model throughout our city, it really attempts to manage homelessness crisis rather than actually solve it. So we need to think together. We need to unite and really try to help. In our community, we're welcoming the homeless. We have multiple short-term and long-term shelters in the area, but we need to do this right. So in response to that, in response to Mayor's efforts and particularly his plan to place a homeless shelter in our community, specifically at 100 Neptune, we formed a coalition for safe housing. And what it is, it's a newly formed group that has been established by local residents to respond to Mayor de Blasio's efforts to open up a homeless shelter in our neighborhood, as I just mentioned. As you know, many of our community members, they have expressed serious concerns about the chosen site. And particularly in regards to the environmental issues there. The building is the location of a former gas station and oil repair shop, which means that it could require serious remediation before anyone can be safely housed on the property. So we intend to hold the city accountable and ensure that nobody will be placed in an unsafe environment. And our new committee, will focus on coordinating a united effort. Again, we need to be united as one community to oppose the city's plan. And we are exploring all possible options, including potentially retaining legal counsel to represent our interests.
I am fortunate to have people like you, Nick, and the support from the community, because a lot of times when things happen within districts, people are busy with their lives, they're working, and we're also in the middle of a pandemic where people don't have jobs, and there's so much anxiety. And so this is like a time where I would never think that we could mobilize a community. But this community is really mobilized because we don't believe in this mayor. We don't believe in his plan. This is a plan that he had back in 2017. Things have changed. You know, we have the pandemic. It's more than 3 years later. Things change, and the way that our mayor has tackled homelessness over the last 6 years is a disaster. Because unfortunately, we have an organization called Breaking Ground, and that organization, that city organization, that they actually go out and try to convince, and the word's convince people who are living in the street to go into shelters. Now, if we had safe shelters, if we have shelters that provide, supportive services, if we have shelters that don't cramp in 14 to 17 people in a room, then you don't need this agency, Breaking Ground, to go out to convince people living in the street, because obviously people would rather be living in the street than be in one of those shelters. And that's why we need to push for permanent housing, supportive housing, because when you take a look at the permanent housing and supportive housing across the city, they're full. People want to be in those buildings, and they don't want to be in something that's called a homeless shelter where it's a total disaster. So it's so important. I always mention, and I think almost every week I say, that people should not only rely on the elected official, because you look around and most elected officials, now it's people are working virtually. They could do whatever they want, and you don't hear from many. But we are nothing. We don't have any power, although we have a title, without the backing of our community. And I am fortunate to represent the 48th Council District because we have the backing. I have the backing. And I have people who are determined to get the job done, to be out there, to do the right thing. So, Nick, I really want to thank you and all your members. Can you tell our listeners in the 48th Council District, or even beyond, because these shelters are going to be popping up all over the place only 11 months before you will see a new administration coming in. So tell our listeners how they could reach out to you, how can they get involved.
Sure, absolutely, and we encourage everyone in our community to get involved, and you can do that. You can reach out to us. So we do have a Facebook page. It's NYC space forward. It's two words, NYC space forward, and then we have an email which is coalition4 safehousing@gmail.com. So it's coalition4 safehousing@gmail.com. And again, we really encourage everyone to reach out, send us an email, tell us about your concerns, and we are building a strong coalition. It's really, really important that we stand as one community and oppose city's plans.
Yeah, I wish you were here 6 years ago, because we need a coalition to go against this administration. We can't do it alone. So, Nick, I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I want to thank all your members who are fighting against our city, against what is happening. And so, with that said, I just want to thank you. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, that's pretty much it. Just one last point. You talked about homelessness, and I just want to say, homelessness is not a crime, and people should be treated with respect, empathy, and basic decency. It's really, really important. And to do that, we need to make it right. We need to make it right by our community. So it's really, really important to ensure that the most vulnerable people in our society, that they have the right place to live in. And that's definitely not homeless shelters. It has to be permanent housing. So, Councilman Deutsch, thank you so much for having me on your show. I really, really appreciate it.
It's an honor to have you. So thank you so much, Nick. You just heard from Nick Zorin, a co-founder of the Coalition for Safe Housing. It's a new committee organized by local residents, and if you want to get a hold of them, Coalition4 for Safe Housing @gmail.com. We're going to take a really quick commercial break, and when we come back, we will reintroduce my co-host, Dr. Faye Zakheim.
Talkline Network Radio, America's longest-running Jewish broadcast network, the voice of the Jewish community.
And now your host.
Welcome back, and you're listening to Chaim the Radio, 620 on your AM dial. And now I'm pleased to reintroduce my co-host on the show, Dr. Faye Zakheim. And this week, Dr. Zakheim gave an incredible talk about the importance of self-care for mental health. And I thought it was so profound, and I asked her to give the talk again tonight here on the show. It's a complicated time, and Dr. Zakheim speaks about the importance of making sure to focus on taking care of yourself and not just the people around you. And we all know there's so many do-gooders out there, and all the do-gooders are always taking care of others, but sometimes you need to take care of yourself. So, Dr. Faye.
Oh, my goodness. To tell you the truth, Councilman...
Sounds like you're vacuuming back there.
Oh, it does? I don't know why. I'm not. Trust me, I'm not vacuuming.
So anyway, I listened to your speech this week about self-care, and I said, wow, that's so important because people really don't think about that. They always worry about others. They don't think about themselves. So tell us about it.
I'll tell you the truth, Chaim. After listening to the program tonight and listening to Zahava Ungar and her sad story, I feel like I need self-care right now. Like life is so complicated right now, and things are so stressful, and everybody is locked up in their houses, and if they're not locked up in their houses and they're walking around and they're worried about picking up COVID outside, and if they're not picking up COVID, they're worried about getting a vaccine, and people are rushing for a vaccine, and will the vaccine take care of this this COVID virus? Will it take care of the next COVID virus? And does it really pay to take the vaccine? Because maybe I'll get sick anyway. And should I be wearing a mask all the time? Do I need to be wearing a mask when my children are around? It's everything is so frightening. So what used to be self-care because we were overwhelmed with life has become self-care for everybody. It's not just people who are overwhelmed with really stressful jobs. Everybody is living a life of stress right now. Everybody. There's nobody out there that doesn't need to be doing self-care. And it's very profound. It's a deep kind of pain. It's very, very deep. And I worry about everybody. And the truth is, like, when people think about self-care, they think that self-care means something simple, like going for a manicure. Self-care means let me go for a massage. Self-care means let me go for a spa treatment. But that's not what self-care is. Those are just extra things. Self-care is really something, it's an actual physical thing you need to do. You need to be able to make room in your head to allow yourself for self-care. We have so much going on in our brains. There's so much going on all the time. Even like what you said at the beginning of the show when you said, no, I can't. How can I leave the city? I need to be here with my people. If they're hearing garbage can trucks, I need to hear garbage can trucks. And if they're hearing ambulances, then I need to hear ambulances. Now, if your brain is so busy with worrying about ambulances and garbage trucks and snow and my parents and my children and my grandparents, where could you possibly find the energy to do self-care for yourself? So it's really an action. You really have to say to yourself, I am going to make room in my head, and I'm going to make room for self-care. Now, how do you do that? How do you make room in your head? I was just going to ask you that. Yeah?
I was just going to ask you that. How do you do that?
So how do you do that? Everybody has their own thing, their own special little secret thing that makes them feel relaxed. What might make me feel relaxed might be completely different than what makes you feel relaxed. For me, it might be turning on music and dancing. That might make me feel good. For you, it might just be sitting in a quiet room with nobody bothering you and just sitting over there in a quiet place. For somebody else, it might be going out for a walk. One thing that really is major for people who want to do anything about like helping themselves with stress, one thing major is moving away from where the stress is. So if you know that you're in a certain area and that is like just creating a lot of stress for you, go out and take a walk. You don't have to be a runner. You don't have to be a bicycle ride. You don't have to be like this pro athlete. It's just enough to go out of that space. Even if you go into your car and turn on your music and you're alone in your car with your music, that's considered self-care. Self-care is about recharging yourself. It's about coming out of the self-care with enough, like when you take your car in for more gas, when your car runs out of gas. Self-care means that you're filling your car up with gas. You're filling yourself up with new energy so that when you come back into the house, or you come back into that environment that's a stressful environment, hey, guess what? I have new gasoline in my car. I can even smile. I can even have a conversation. But sometimes we get so incredibly juiced out that there is nothing left for us to give. And also, another thing to know is that if you can catch it before it catches you, that's an amazing thing to do. In other words, we all know when we're going to hit our limit. If you can manage to catch it before you're done, you're cooked, you're ready to plot. If you can just do that and step away and recharge, that would be an amazing thing. For Shlomo, for my husband, believe it or not, for him, recharging was about going to Camp Simcha. It was about taking himself out of his own situation, taking himself out of his own business situation that was going on, and completely devoting himself to helping children with cancer. For him, it was an escape from what his other stresses in life were. So for someone like you, Councilman, what is your self-care? What makes you feel ready to recharge? What recharges you?
So I was just telling my wife that I want to go to Florida for a few days. But then I feel if I'm going there, I might miss something going on here. And the problem is that people that do for others, someone like you, Faye, and someone like there's so many people out there, you just heard from Nick, who's doing this work for others. People that are involved in the community, and just you don't have to be involved in the community, you could help your neighbor. People tend to neglect the things that they need to do because they're always busy with other people.
And that's right. But what happens? We're all normal. We're all human beings. We burn out. We're not robots. We're human beings, and the stress wears you down. And as you hear, like even when I just listened to Mrs. Ungar, that was very, very, very hard for me. And I feel like I need to do self-care after hearing Mrs. Ungar, because when I hear Mrs. Ungar, I see my mother and her going through Mauthausen. When I hear Mrs. Ungar, I see my father and his whole family being killed. So when we see something that hurts us, it's not just that one little thing. Suddenly that one thing balloons into bigger things, and it ends up taking over my entire self. And how can I function if I'm not going to do something for myself right now? So when I get off this telephone with you, I'm going to recharge. I'm going to go do some yoga. I'm going to turn on some music that I enjoy listening to. Somebody said the other night when we were doing the program about self-care, they said that their self-care is turning on Netflix. You know what? That's a great form of self-care because it takes the person away from their reality into another place. And that's why I'm asking you, Councilman, what is your self-care?
The Netflix is not self-care to me because usually when you watch Netflix, it's usually like at 1 o'clock in the morning, and then you watch it for a few hours, and the next morning you have a problem getting up. So you might have the self-care at 2 o'clock in the morning, but then when you wake up in the morning, you need that self-care again.
Yeah. So what's the self-care? What's your self-care? If going to Florida means for you that you're going to continue worrying about what's going on back home, well, then that's not self-care. Can you go to Florida and say, you know what? For 8 hours a day, you take my telephone away from me. I'm not going. You keep it. And if something major happens, it'll happen. People will survive. You have to just allow yourself to recharge. I think it's a crucial part. I know for me, if I would have stayed in New York during these 8 months of COVID, I wouldn't have made it through. Yes, I'm up here. I'm working nonstop. I'm up at 6:30 in the morning, and I work straight through till 11:30 at night. And I'm doing cases from up here, and I'm doing all my mental health stuff from up here. And I'm probably working more hours, but at least I'm away, and that it makes a difference. That's my recharging.
Yeah, and you're right. People just can't depart from the phone. I mean, I know when I go on vacation, my phone is with me, and sometimes my wife would tell me, look, just leave your phone, put it down, put it in the charger, put it away. But I just can't depart from my phone, and I think that's a problem with everyone, and that's why this discussion is so important, because people need to be reminded what self-care is. And maybe tonight, when I finish this radio program, I'll do some self-care. Maybe I'll do some yoga, maybe some push-ups, who knows what. But we'll figure something out, but at least it gets me thinking of how I can do self-care and what I should do, because, I heard your speech, and what you said is that your mind could only occupy so much. And if you're always occupied with helping and dealing with so many different things, and you don't have time for yourself, then you don't have room in your head anymore.
That's exactly. That is exactly. You really listen to that class, because that's exactly. We call it chocolate on the brain. What does that mean? Your whole brain is taken up with chocolate. There's chocolate, and there's no room for really thinking. Now, how do you get that chocolate on the brain off? You have to move it away, because the brain only has a certain amount of space. And if it's all taken up with stress, you can't even think clearly. All that happens is that there's just a lot of stress over there. So you're right. It's about moving stuff away and forcing yourself, literally, taking the phone. If the phone is the thing that does it, if it's all on that phone, it's about taking the phone, putting it on airplane mode, shutting it off, doing the do not disturb, and saying, you know what? For 40 minutes, 45 minutes, 1 hour, whatever it is, that phone is off. And when I turn it back on, everything will be there anyway, but at least I had an hour of breathing. At least I had an hour of just walking around without having that phone in my hand. It's crucial. It's crucial because we are living in really, really very, very, very stressful times. We don't know what the next morning is going to bring. How many people lost money because of this stock market crazy thing that happened today? Everything. Life, how many people are having a hard time? We remember when Rafi Tritel was on and he was telling us about his restaurant business. Now imagine if he could not take his phone and just turn it off for a little bit. There's an incredible burnout. And he's a person who likes to do mitzvos. All of us, we love to do things for other people. But if we juice ourselves out and there's no gasoline left in the tank, well, guess what? How are we going to be helping other people? There's nothing left. There's nothing there to give. We have nothing left to give.
Yeah, what I always saw that, when someone has a problem, let's say I have a problem, a personal issue, whatever the case is, it's very difficult for one to deal with their own problem. And it's always easier to deal with the next person's problem. So I always used to say, it's so important for people to help others. Why? Because one person, it may be difficult for that individual to deal with their own problems. I'll give you an example. Someone has a child that may be at risk, right? So a parent goes crazy. How do I deal with my child? I can't. But then a neighbor might be able to speak to that child and come across and get through to that child, and because a lot of times children don't like to listen to their parents because of its authority, but they would listen to someone else. But many times people just cannot deal with their own things that are happening throughout life. And during this pandemic, people losing jobs, people feel lost at times, and they feel paralyzed because they're in a bad situation and they just cannot deal with it. And that's why it's so important for others always to get involved, reach out, but also make sure that you have self-care, of course. But always reach out, because if everyone helps each other, this world would be a better place.
Yeah, it's sometimes it's really about making the phone call and allowing somebody to see that you're in pain. Right now I'm dealing with my mother and her. Unfortunately she's deteriorating. guess what? You know, it was taking over my life. I was starting to feel incredibly shamed. I was feeling guilty. I felt terrible. Maybe I should just be with her every single second. Even for me, I needed self-care. So I joined a support group. I joined a support group on Zoom for caregivers. And I think each of us has to know what it is that, you know, does it take sitting down and having an ice cream? Is that what makes you feel good? Well, you know what? Have it. Have the ice cream and enjoy it. Everyone knows what it is. If for you, if it's doing push-ups, well, get rid of the phone. Put the phone away and do those push-ups without the phone next to you. Everyone knows what it is that makes them feel good. And I think your point is also a really important point. If you can't deal with your own child, call somebody else. Go over to somebody else's house and let them, if you have a family member that can watch your child for a little bit, yeah, do that. People need to be helping each other. It's so important right now. It's just really important.
So, Dr. Faye, I just want to thank you, not only for being my co-host, but actually being a guest and a co-host. And I want to tell our listeners that Dr. Faye, every week she speaks at Rage via Zoom. And it's basically, her speeches are like wake-up calls to people, reminding people of things they need to do. And she always, every week she has a different speech on a different topic. And Dr. Faye, you're truly amazing. And I listen.
It's a lot of fun. Chaim, you know what I miss?
What?
I miss our self-care of being together on Friday nights at our Friday. That was major self-care.
Oh, yeah, those meals were the
being
best.
Being able to sit at the Friday night table and without our phones, without anything, and just listening to the stories of the Ragers. That was, I can't wait for those days to come back again. I really look forward to that.
Yeah, that was great because you had a roundtable discussion. Everyone spoke about something that inspired them for that week. And every week was the same thing, and people spoke about, you know, a miracle that happened to them or someone that inspired them, and it's really beautiful. So, Dr. Faye, thank you very much. We're running out of time, so I want to wish all our listeners a Shabbat Shalom, a good Shabbos to everyone, and I want to thank Mrs. Ungar once again, and God bless all our Holocaust survivors.